You sell a bunch of products, which means you need to know and need to be able to think through which ones to advertise next, which ones to focus your creative efforts on next. That is a crucial question in your business. If you sell multiple products, it can be really hard to know where to put your creative effort. Which product should you sell? Should you be trying to sell more of? Should it be your most popular products? Should it be a product that's not moving as much so you can diversify your product mix a little bit more? What about a high margin product that's a slow mover? All those kinds of questions, all those kinds of factors are important in considering where to put your creative efforts next, because creative efforts are not endless. A creative budget is not endless. Creative time is not endless. So you got to think best about how to allocate your creative time and effort and dollars in your product portfolio, in your product mix, and your brand. So today on the show, this is a massive issue that really is important for determining the success of your business. It's sort of a hidden issue in a lot of businesses. And I'm going to help you think through how to prioritize your creative efforts and budgets across your products, give you a heuristic, a rubric to use to think through that question. So thanks so much for watching the Andrew Ferris podcast. I'm so glad you've joined me today. Let's dive into the question where you should put your creative efforts next. Which products should you advertise next? All right, I hope my framing of that question makes sense. The basic idea, right, is that you've got a bunch of products that your brand sells. And I've dealt with this with a bunch of different brands. There's a sort of, some brands have one core hero product, and they're all always a little nervous that if something goes wrong there at the market level, or if they suddenly get a bunch of bad reviews and something happens there, or inventory. This is the really common problem. You run out of inventory on the product and suddenly you can't advertise other products or you can't spend any advertising dollars because your hero product now can't be sold. And so suddenly your budget goes from $5,000 a day to $1,000 a day, and it screws up all your forecasts and all those kinds of things because something went wrong with your manufacturer, or you just didn't inventory plan well, or whatever. This question comes up all the time. And so for all kinds of reasons, brands need to be able to think through where to put their creative efforts next. And there's a lot of questions involved here because it depends a little bit on what the goals of your business are and some of those things that are really specific and that I can't answer in the aggregate. But I was helping a client think through this question for their business, and they were actually thinking about it at the aggregator level. They were thinking, okay, they actually have multiple brands. And so they had to make some determinations about where they ought to effort their creative next, because their creative resources are limited, right? You only have so many dollars. You only have so much time. You only have so many people to work on your ads. And so if you're going to run ads, or even really anything you do, send emails or generate organic content or anything like that, how should you determine where to put those efforts? Well, it sounds in some ways like an easy question, right? Because the answer is wherever they have the most potential impact. But that phrase, wherever they have the most potential impact, is where the problem is, because how to answer that question is determined by a number of things. So today, what I want to do is just walk you through a few ways to think about that question, really the impact side of the equation. If you think about advertising, there are two sides of the equation. There's the cost side and the impact side. And what you want is to minimize cost and maximize impact. The gap between cost and impact, or maybe instead of impact, saying the value you create, so cost and value, the gap between cost and value is profit. And so if you can minimize cost and increase the value, then that's going to generate more profit in your business. So how do you think about that value side of the equation? I've spent a lot of time on this show talking about how you minimize the cost side of the equation, right? That's where bid caps come in. That's where having creative buckets come in. That's where ugly ads. I just did an interview with Barry Hott. You can go back and listen to that came in. There's a link for that in the show notes. But I just think I have not done quite enough on the question of what about value? How can you determine which products are most likely to create the most value? Okay. And so I'm going to give you a few steps today. I'm going to give you 5 elements of your products that you can use to think through. And maybe what you can do is sort of grade these on a scale of 1 to 10 in your business. If you're trying to determine where to put your effort between 3 products or something, give each of them a 1 to 10 grade on these 5 metrics. Okay. And if you've got a product, whichever one has the highest score, just do this. Whichever one has the highest score on the combined across those 5 areas, that's the one to put your product on next. Okay. So 1 to 10 grading, these 5 areas of your products, and then focus there next. Okay. Number 1, margin. This is the most obvious. Okay. This is the most obvious place to put effort. If your product is high margin, you should consider running ads toward that product, because the game is a lot easier if you have more margin dollars to play with. Imagine product A has 80 points of landed margin. It's very cheap to ship, right? It's cheap to make, cheap to package, cheap to ship. etc. Nothing else about the product besides that. If between product A and product B, where product B has 60 points of margin, let's say, versus product A has 80 points of margin, knowing nothing else at all, you ought to put more effort into product A because very simply, right? Now I can perform at a lower return on ad spend and generate just as high or even a higher return. And so margin is the most obvious place to look in your business. And I see this all the time where brands have multiple products with really different margins, and they don't actually think through this very well. They end up blending up an average margin across their entire portfolio and think like, okay, this is our margin. But actually, it's possible, like, and this comes to the question of like ROAS target, ad account. People will say, what ROAS target should I have? Well, it just depends, right? If product A has 80 points of margin and product B has 60 points of margin, all other things being equal, product A has a lower ROAS target than product B because, again, you get the same return. And so this sounds obvious, but think about this carefully in your business. There's all kinds of elements of it. Sometimes also a hidden element of margin is that if you could sell more of the product, you could also make more of the product when you manufacture it, and you might have price breaks in doing that. So not only can you get more margin, or not only do you have more margin now, but if it's a high margin product that's a slower mover or even a fast mover, right? It's possible that you can actually get more margin later as well by doing higher volume there. And so there's sort of a secondary margin benefit to generating more sales on the same product just because of economies of scale. So margin is number one. That's really obvious. Make sure you are considering that. If you have not already, if you've not already signed up for my email list on my website, go do that. The email pop-up on my website promises 4 essential e-commerce resources. One of those is my unit economics calculator that you can use at the product level to calculate your margin and even your targets across the board. So go check that out. Go check out the unit economics calculator. I don't even send a lot of email. In fact, I don't know if I barely basically ever sent an email to my list about much, but you can go get that free unit economics calculator that will help you determine this for different products, all the way down to the level of like returns and merchant account fees, all the things that go into your landed margin to your customer. So margin is number one. Number two, lifetime value. Okay. So this is sort of part of margin in one respect because it's connected to it, but actually is a little bit different. It's essentially margin over time, right? And so LTV, lifetime value of a customer. Now you can measure LTV all kinds of time windows, and there's all kinds of secondary factors here related to cash management and some of those things, right? You might have a product with a lower long-term LTV, but a higher LTV on a short window. And maybe that's more important to you because you get cash back faster, et cetera. I tend to look at this on a 1-year LTV basis, but have conversations about cash, et cetera. But again, all of the things being equal, higher LTV is better. Okay. And higher LTV products ought to eat up more of your margin time. So an extreme example of this, I was just talking with a brand that has put lots and lots of their effort into a very high margin, very low LTV product. Okay. And so it looked to them like it was the place where they could generate the most Facebook sales because it was very high margin. And let's call it, I don't remember exactly, but let's call it 75 points of margin landed to the customer. Okay. Pretty high margin product. So it looks like a great product. The problem is it had almost no LTV. The product lasts forever, works great, and you don't need very much of it at a time. Because of that, it basically generated no LTV. Maybe a little, but basically none, right? On the other hand, they had another product, actually a series of products that were much worse margin, like 50 points of landed margin to the customer. So significantly less. If you only went off the first thing I said here, margin only, you would easily pick number one. But this second product, customers went through it really fast. It had like 300% annual LTV. So if I spend $1 today, I'm generating another $2 over the rest of the year, right? Like just a huge amount of LTV. And therefore, the potential contribution margin that this product could generate was way higher than product A. And so product A would really need to generate a very low ROAS to get anywhere near the contribution margin of product B. And that difference is really significant because over more time, if you've got a bunch of LTV, you can generate way more contribution margin in your business. Now, there's all kinds of problems with doing this related to forecasting, related to cash management, etc. Okay. So this can be tricky for you. If you want to get a sense of kind of how to think about this in your business, like go listen to either of my interviews. Well, go listen to my interview with Jack Rubin. I'll put the link in the show notes for that. I actually don't know if my second interview with Jack Rubin will be released by the time that this comes out. So at least one interview I have with Jack Rubin, maybe two. And if I have them both, I'll put them both in the show notes to hear somebody express how to think very well about LTV in your business. Because if you can unlock this and measure it carefully, it can be extremely, powerful. And you can generate way, way, way more money for your brand by investing in higher LTV products. In fact, this question is so significant that I actually watched a brand really specifically put way too much effort into one product when they should have put it into another, and just didn't realize that they were just going to have a much harder time actually generating the same level of contribution margin in the business because of this. And it was all about that margin question. I've seen this in a number of different places happen the same way. And so make sure that you're thinking carefully about LTV in this process. In some ways, what both of those two things are getting at is this question of contribution margin, right? Contribution margin measured as revenue minus ad spend minus COGS. Okay, so revenue minus all variable costs associated with the business. And that's net landed COGS. It's everything associated with getting the product to the customer. However much money you have left over is contribution margin. And measured over time, that's the LTV consideration here. And so you generate a bunch more contribution dollars over time because of that. Another way to think about this is like almost like you're investing in different products or investing in different equities in a portfolio, right? If I can get a 100% return on my money for product B, when I could only get a 20% return annualized on my money from product A, then product B is the place to go, right? It's just really clear. Now, the thing is, you may realize more of that 20% upfront for product A. And so that's the reason people go there. But if you sort of think about the product again as like an investment vehicle, then given more time and given a sort of an annualized return, you could sort of think through the question of where to put your time. In fact, I really like this way of thinking about products in general, is thinking about them as investment vehicles. Every product you sell is an investment vehicle. When you go order it from your manufacturer, when you go advertise it, you're thinking about it in terms of where can I maximize the return on my money? Just kind of thinking through that rubric really helps, right? And so that's the idea of contribution margin over time. Margin and LTV make up a lot of that. Okay, now, look, again, in some ways, it sounds like that could be everything you need to know about how to think about where to put your products, okay? However, that is not everything you need to know, because there's actually a few other factors that are a really significant deal here. And the next one I want to talk about is total addressable market, okay? TAM, T-A-M, TAM, total addressable market. And I want to think about that at the product level. TAM is the notion that a certain product may inherently have an ability to reach a much wider audience than another. I'll tell you, I've considered starting a brand around a product that has very high margin and pretty good LTV, so far as I know. And the whole thing that is keeping me from starting this brand and launching this brand with this product is that I am not sure there is much TAM there. Essentially, I would have to do the true work of creating demand for this product in a way that could make it really tough for me to actually get any meaningful scale in the business. Like, I bet I could sell $500,000 to $1 million in revenue worth of this product. I'm not sure I could get it to 10, and I'm not sure I could get it to much above that. I think I could maybe get it to 5, but as I assess that question, that is the whole issue for me, is like, ooh, could I really get it there? Or is it like 2 or 3 max? In which case, is that really worth my time relative to some other places to put it? Even though it's high margin, decent LTV, I think it's just a challenge because there are just not that many people who use it. And I'm not totally sure I could convince them to start. Okay. And so that question ends up playing into tons and tons of brands' decision making. How many people are there really who are going to buy this product? Is the advertising job going to be drastically harder because there's just not a lot of demand for the product in the marketplace? People sort of underrate this element of meta ads, that meta ads in some ways is actually, it is a demand generation platform, to be clear, but it's kind of also a demand capture platform. Like, don't miss the fact that it's the moment you start getting served an ad for one product, right? Or you go start searching around for one product. What happens? Meta serves people on Instagram and Facebook ads for a whole bunch more similar products, right? Competitor products in the same space. You need to add members of your team who are good quality employees, people who can make a real impact in your business, and yet you also want to keep your business lean and you want to not pay too much for that in a way that eats away at your profits. This is a classic problem for every business, but if you are in e-commerce, you should do that. You should solve that problem by working with my friends at More Staffing. More Staffing is a recruiting agency that helps you find like recruit, onboard, train, and provide ongoing coaching to incredible e-commerce talent in the Philippines, where you will be paying top dollar relative to Filipino salaries, which will attract incredible talent to your business. And at the same time, will be less than you would pay for those same folks at the manager, director, even executive level in your business in the US. You can find incredible talent. And if you're thinking about Filipino talent or overseas talent in general entirely as like $5 an hour virtual assistants, you are missing a big opportunity. There is much, much more talent than that available to you in the Philippines, with people with deep e-commerce resumes who can make a serious impact on your business. In fact, More Staffing was founded by Greg Carey, who was running a US-based e-commerce business, and at some point, I think had a team of like 17 employees from the Philippines on his team. Full employees, not just like overseas contractor you talk to occasionally, but like real employees across the business. Eventually, one of those employees, so talented, she ended up being the CEO of More Staffing in the Philippines. Her name is Lara. I've had her on the show twice. Like, these are incredible people who've figured out how to do a great job really adding huge value to the business in the Philippines, to your business in the Philippines. And so you should be considering this. There's no reason for you not to. Not only have I considered it, I've done it. I have a team in the Philippines that was staffed entirely by More Staffing, working for me and my agency across video editing, design, production, those kinds of things, project management. They're great. I love them. They do awesome work and they're a huge help. So consider adding talent from the Philippines to your business by going to morenow.co/AF to get connected with More Staffing. That's morenow.co/AF. Got my own page now for you to go visit, morenow.co/AF, and get connected to More Staffing today. In that respect, Meta is actually a demand capture platform not as much, but in some way similarly to the way that it's a demand generation platform. And there are very large brands built by selling boring stuff that lots and lots of people need. Okay. And it's because there's just so much total addressable market for that product. So for you, if you are running a brand, and again, I've dealt with a client that had one core hero product that was not as good on the margin side and was pretty close on the LTV side as some other products they launched. The difference is product A, the one they were selling a whole lot of, had really good TAM, really good total addressable market. Everybody needed this product, okay? And product B, not so clear. And secondly, there's sort of a related thing here where for product B, it also seems to me that like the brand kind of got associated with product A in a way that made it so that product B just didn't have the same resonance in the market from that particular brand, because they perceived the brand as a brand that sells product A. And so product B was kind of a stretch. So I don't know if I really need that. Now, there's counterexamples of this, and you can win on this over time. There's a great example that I heard Sean Frank from Ridge give recently, where he noted that the brand Bic, it was like number one in disposable razors, number one in pens, and number one in lighters and cheap lighters. And if you think about that, like those three categories, lighters, pens, and disposable razors, actually have nothing to do with one another. So over enough time, you can do great in multiple categories, right? But again, all of those do also have really broad TAM. So think about that question in your business. Does this product that I'm advertising have a real chance to reach a wide audience? If so, it becomes more appealing. If not, it may be that it's a really tough advertising lift. Now, this could be the job of great advertising, okay? Great advertising could create demand for that category in the space. And if you are awesome at this skill, then maybe it's something you want to do. Again, especially even if it's limited TAM, but if it's high margin, high LTV. And that's one of the things that keeps me coming back to the product I mentioned earlier that I've considered starting a brand around. But is like, maybe I could solve the advertising problem in a way that made sense. But that's kind of the question for me. There's sort of I'm going to give you a 3B here, a sub point B with this TAM question, which is to factor in seasonality, because TAM actually changes relative to seasonality. In fact, for one brand I was mentioning earlier, that they had product A that they were associated with selling, they sold this lots of time. The only problem is that product is also pretty highly seasonal. So during certain months, they could sell a whole bunch of that. And really, it was a silly idea for them to spend much time selling any of their other products in their portfolio. But for product B, maybe the time to really effort that product was when the seasonality got worse on product A. Okay. And so if you are a brand that has a highly seasonal product, it's possible that what you actually have to do is do product development around your off seasons to try to solve that problem, or to just think in terms of like, okay, yeah, at some point, this is where I want to put all my effort is in product A, but not right now, right? Right now is not the time that I need that. So yeah, so I think that's the other factor here with TAM is that TAM actually kind of changes depending on seasonality all the time. And let's take a super extreme example, right? Imagine you're selling Christmas wreaths. Okay. During a lot of the year, your total addressable market for Christmas wreaths is zero. Nobody's buying one. Okay. But during a couple months, your total addressable market is huge for that product. And so you can go sell a lot of it. And so TAM changes seasonally depending on those things. All right. So we've got margin, number one, LTV, number two, TAM, number three, with reference to seasonality. Okay. Number four, let's talk about inventory position. Okay. Now, this is another really obvious thing. There's a few sub factors here that I want to talk through, but it's a really big deal. If you are constantly selling out of your product and cannot stock it fast enough, you should stop putting your advertising efforts into that product for a little bit and see if you can solve another one. Again, this is an issue I've run into with clients where I've got a product that's really hot in the market, outperformed my expectations really significantly, basically driven by TAM, similar margins, similar LTV to other products I'm already selling. TAM is massive on it right now. So we've got a lot of tailwinds TAM related tailwinds as we launch ads. And yet we are having some trouble keeping that product in stock because it's going so well. So now that means we're going to go put our efforts into products that do not fit those top three elements of my rubric as well, entirely because we have to go solve. I mean, not we, right? The advertising team doesn't have to solve this. Somebody in the business has to go solve the inventory issue. They got to change their demand planning. They got to go rework with their manufacturers, think about shortening timelines, all those kinds of things. But that stuff doesn't get solved overnight. And because that stuff doesn't get solved overnight, the marketing team now has to go and shift their focus to other products. And so inventory position is a big deal. And this is actually one of the reasons to think about this question in general. The more diversified your ad account is around multiple products, the less fragile it is based on these kinds of things. If you lose your ability to sell some of product A, but you can still sell product B, C, and D because product A only takes up 40% of your ad account, even though it's your best product, right? Now you can go put effort into product B, C, and D and still be in pretty good shape. If product A is 90% of your ad account and 90% of your ad spend, you can run into real trouble there. And so there can be sometimes a value in just diversification across the board for these other products. Now, that said, if 90% of your spend is going towards product A, you probably ought to think about stocking more of it over more time. You probably ought to have your operations team having a conversation with your marketing team going like, hey, we can run out of products B, C, and D, and it's not a big deal. Let's not put our cash towards stocking a whole bunch of this stuff. Okay. But product A, we definitely want to keep in stock. If we do not keep that product in stock, we can run into some real trouble. And so maybe think about your inventory ordering differently relative to those things. This is why marketing, finance, operations, supply chain got to be in the same room together at some point to talk about what's going on for these things. It's never going to be perfect, and in a fast growing business, these things are really hard to predict. But ultimately, it's really important that they're talking with one another to try to minimize those problems as much as possible. But inventory position is a really big deal. And to be clear, inventory position also can be a seasonality issue as well, right? So imagine you sell apparel, imagine you sell sweatshirts, okay? At some point, you need to really maximize your efforts towards creative for the fall into the winter. And over the spring, you do not want to do that as much unless you have so many sweatshirts around that you're going to sit on those things all summer and you really need to sell more of them. And so you create some sale or whatever and put a bunch of effort towards turning as many of those sweatshirts back into cash as possible to get you through the summer months cash wise, right? That can be a challenge as well. So those elements are all important factors in thinking through this, but inventory position really matters a lot, and your ability to actually provide the product, to make the product that you're trying to sell is a really big deal and can be a thing. And in some ways, that can be an override on all of the other factors. At some point, if you run out of inventory, it doesn't really matter how it rates out on margin, LTV, and TAM. Okay. If you're running out of inventory, it just creates problems that you have to solve in other businesses. And so you have to go make those efforts, trying to get out in front of that. And again, the key thing here is to get your marketing team talking with your finance and supply chain folks. And if it's a small business, that might be one person. But to get those people talking to one another can make a huge difference in solving this challenge. All right. So margin, LTV, TAM, with factoring in seasonality, inventory position is number 4. Let's talk about number 5. I'm going to call this operational lift. Okay. Operational lift. Here's what I mean by operational lift. What I mean is essentially these are all factors. The operational lift in your ads is actually kind of back to the cost side of the equation. There may be some products that you have a very small asset library for on hand that you don't have many ads at all. And so you have to kind of start from scratch. It's going to take you a really long time to build ads for those. It's going to require a whole bunch of editing, a whole bunch of shooting, getting new influencers, whatever, shipping product to people. All that stuff can be barriers to getting started advertising a new product. And therefore, they can be enough barriers there that you actually don't want to go and try to overcome all that effort. As landing pages sometimes can be a factor here, creating new offers, all email follow-ups relative to certain products that are different than other ones. All of that kind of stuff is all a factor here. This is usually not a problem, but I still want to call it out. For most brands, operational lift is not going to be a big issue. In fact, you may just on my scale of 1 to 10, measure out like 10, no problem, where 10 is good, right? 10 means it's a low operational lift. Not a big deal, but it can be. I've seen this be a factor for some businesses where they just don't have almost any assets built up. Their PDP isn't that good and they know it. Their landing pages, they haven't built landing pages for it, etc. But for all those reasons, I think that sometimes this is a factor that people can underrate in all of this, that starting from scratch on a new product can really matter. Again, for an aggregator, this can matter a lot. If you have multiple brands in your portfolio, the operational lift to adding new creative for new brands can be super high. Very little about what works and what doesn't work. There's sort of like intellectual operational lift, right? Where you haven't spent money on it, so you don't have a feel for what works with your customers. All of these things can be factors, and it can just be one more thing to consider. So operational lift from the advertising, production, creative side of things is an underrated factor here that people just often don't consider. So that's it. Okay, so there's my five buckets, okay? Margin, LTV, TAM, operational lift, inventory position. So if you just think about this, right? Imagine you have a product that's very high margin, very high LTV, very high addressable market, like TAM, okay? You have plenty of inventory on hand. It's not too hard to make. And the operational lift of doing it is not too bad. What I just described is a skincare business, right? That's why so many people are in skincare businesses, because it's a really good opportunity. And so maybe you would factor in TAM, maybe you'd factor in competition because it's so hard, right? Maybe it's a supplement business, can also be an apparel business in some cases, though. Some of those things that I just said there don't apply quite as strictly to that. And there's massive TAM. That's the thing that people love about apparel businesses, decent margins, sometimes pretty good LTV, all that. But that's why so many people go into those businesses, is because they check all of those boxes. If you have a product that fits a whole lot of those, that's where you should put your creative effort next, because you can make a very big financial impact for yourself and your business if you can hit on all of those things. So that's it. Margin, LTV, TAM, inventory position, operational lift. Those 5 factors should be the things that determine where you put your creative effort. All right, thanks so much for watching and for listening to another episode of the Andrew Ferris Podcast. I hope this was helpful to you. I would love to hear from you if it wasn't. Any thoughts that you have, I am all ears. People have given me some great feedback recently, and I'm so grateful for it. I would also love any questions that you have as a follow-up. Send all that to podcast@ajfgrowth.com or DM me on Twitter @AndrewJFerris. An easy way to do that. You can find everything that I'm doing at ajfgrowth.com, including contacting me, including, don't forget, those 4 essential e-commerce resources that you can get for your business for free, sent to you, and I'm not going to spam your email inbox. Don't forget to go reach out to my friends at More Staffing. Virtual assistants can be helpful. Virtual professionals can change your business. Go to morenow.co/AF, my own landing page now. morenow.co/AF to get started with More Staffing and get incredible talent from the Philippines working on your business. What is coming next for me? Oh, another opening books is coming next. I've been talking about this a bunch, but it's true. It's going to be with a brand called Pretty Boy, opening the books with a brand called Pretty Boy. And I actually have another one scheduled to record as well. I've got multiple opening the books still coming. If you have not gone back and listened to my episodes with Nazar Jafari from Mixed by Nazran, or with Van Holtz and Mike Lawson from his team at Beard Brand, go check those out. People love those episodes, and I think that's because they're the closest thing I can give you to really what do some of these factors look like live in an actual business, where we show all the real numbers, look at advertising dashboards together, all that kind of stuff. And you can find those opening books episodes by going to ajfgrowth.com/mixed or /beardbrand to go find those 2 episodes. Again, I got more coming very soon. So make sure you smash that subscribe button. I would love to have you along for the journey in the future. Don't forget to rate and review. All those things are so helpful to me, and I will see you next time.